It's time for another College 12-Pack podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Kahn, Senior Editor of the College Wires. With me, as always, Tyler Natuno of LSU Tigers Wire. Tyler, I was hoping to kick this show off. We were going to start talking about the coaches poll, the AP poll, but then Michael Oher versus the Tuohys. This came about out of nowhere. It seems like. First off, I mean, The Blind Side, right? I mean, you love that movie. We all love that movie. I might hold it in a different light if these allegations are actually true. When you look at Michael Oher versus Tuohy, versus the Tuohys, really, I think a lot of people in the court of public opinion is probably going to side with the player who feels like he was wronged by some prominent people taking advantage of this young kid back when he was in high school.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, this really kind of came out of nowhere. We were just planning for the podcast and ESPN drops a story on this. And just to be clear, the initial story is pretty much entirely based on a lawsuit filed by Michael Oher against the Tuohys. So just definitionally, it was kind of a one-sided story. So that's just kind of worth keeping in the back of your mind. But yeah, so he's basically alleging that the whole premise behind the movie and the book and the whole story was not true. Alleging that rather than adopting him, they tricked him into making them his conservators. And then they profited off the movie, making millions. The upfront fee, apparently, according to the lawsuit, made like $250,000 plus like 2.5% royalties. He's saying he didn't see a dime of that. And he's also saying that he didn't find any of this out until February of this year. So, according to him, it's all pretty fresh. And to be fair to him too, he's been critical in the past of the movie, specifically with like the way it portrayed him, his intelligence. Also, there were just some accuracy issues. Like, if you remember in the movie, a pretty big deal of it is him learning to play football, which apparently he had been playing for years. He didn't learn that after, sort of being taken into the Tuohy family. So obviously then yesterday, this kind of took another turn because the Tuohys respond with a statement of their own, pretty strong denial of his allegations. They're claiming basically a $15 million shakedown. They're saying that he threatened to go to the press with this story if they didn't pay him $15 million. They're saying that they paid him equal amounts from the movie that they got. Everything here that's being alleged seems pretty easily verifiable one way or the other. Like, I'm not trying to ride the fence here. It's just a sort of sensitive ongoing legal situation. It does seem pretty zero sum though. Like, right? I don't think there's like a lot of room for middle ground here. Kind of seems like someone's telling the truth and someone's not.
Either you did or you didn't. That's really what it boils down to it. And it got me thinking, and I looked into it. It doesn't really seem like there's anything to it. As far as the statute of limitation on the NCAA investigation, they found there was no wrongdoing. It just made me wonder. Was Ole Miss paying the Tuohys to hand deliver Michael Oher for the Ole Miss Rebels? But they found nothing wrong. So I doubt that will even be brought up. But it does beg the question. And you're right. This seems cut and dry. Either you have documentation to prove it or you don't. And so I don't know how long this will go on. But when you look at the story as a whole, it just made me raise an eyebrow a little bit because I didn't expect a story like this to come out, even though we do know that Michael Oher has always been critical of The Blind Side. But moving right along, we're going to get into the upcoming college football season. The coaches poll came out last week. We didn't really talk about it, obviously. There were a lot of other things going on. Realignment, the death of the Pac-12, essentially. But let's get into the coaches poll. And, Tyler, I'm going to kick this off with a team that I think is way too high. The Oklahoma Sooners coming in at 19, voted in by the coaches. Am I missing something? What exactly has Oklahoma proven to be a top 25 team? They've added, don't get me wrong, they recruited well. They brought in some guys, but let's not forget, this is still the same team that went 6-7 last year with a loss to Florida State in the Cheez-It Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with anything that you're saying. I mean, I have my own questions about Oklahoma. I will say there does seem to be at least a pretty loud group of people in the media that kind of are bullish on this team for whatever reason. Seem to think Oklahoma's going to make a sort of push in year two. I mean, I don't really see it. I mean, I think Dylan Gabriel is a pretty solid quarterback. I think offensively, if he can stay healthy, they'll probably be able to do some good things. But I mean, we've talked about it ad nauseum on this show. That defense was a mess, and he's a defensive coach. I mean, I don't know. It would take a lot, I think, for them to make a significant leap. I mean, I don't think they'll be in the 500 range again, probably. But I mean, I was surprised to see them in the preseason rankings.
And this is not to say that I think Oklahoma is not going to be ranked at some point in the season or ranked by season's end.
Yeah.
I just don't know that they've done enough. And again, let's be honest, preseason rankings, why do they even matter? They don't. But those of us in the media like to talk about it. And that's what we're going to do. Tyler, who do you got too high in the coaches poll?
Yeah, I've got Notre Dame. They're up at 13. Look, I'm not down on Notre Dame. Like, I like Marcus Freeman. I liked the move to acquire Sam Hartman at quarterback, but Hartman, is a guy that really kind of made his money at Wake Forest with the RPO game. That's not really the type of offense that Notre Dame runs. I think there's going to be an adjustment here. I mean, this was just a Notre Dame team that was inconsistent last year. They went 9-4. The way things started, not a bad result in year one by any means, but a team that lost to Marshall, like a team that lost games it shouldn't have. I just think heading into this year to put them in the top 15, I just am not quite sure I see it. I think they're probably more of a team closer to like 20.
And let's not forget, Tommy Rees isn't calling the offensive shots anymore. He's down at Alabama. I wasn't sold on the offensive coordinator hire, and that makes me wonder how effective Sam Hartman's going to be. Let's not forget he's one of the top passers in the country, one of the active leaders among passing yards, touchdowns. Any metric you want to look at, he's among the league leaders. But I still have my questions about it. But moving right along, we are going to get into who's too low. You know what? I think I'm going to look at number 14, Utah Utes coming in. The two-time defending Pac-12 champions, and let's be honest, I know they got questions, but if there's one coach that I will continuously rely on and I will pound the table for, Scott Whittingham. I think he does a fantastic job. We've seen it time and time again. He goes up against some teams that he's overpowered against, and, let's be honest, he slapped USC around a little bit last year to win that second straight Pac-12 title. After doing it to Oregon the year before. So Utes, a little higher for me.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of built Utah in just a machine. I think the big question mark kind of coming into this year for them is just the quarterback situation. They've got some injury problems there. Obviously, Cam Rising tore his ACL in the bowl game. He's participating, it seems like, in fall camp. Not looking like he's going to be ready to go for week one against Florida, but obviously, something to monitor there. And then their backup quarterback, kind of a scary situation, was hospitalized last week for a lacerated kidney. So he's also potentially, they could theoretically be heading into that home game against Florida to open the year on that Thursday night, with a third string quarterback. So, I think early in the year might be tough as they're trying to get back to healthy, but I think this team at full strength, absolutely. It's a borderline top 10 team in the country.
Well, they do have a quarterback they could throw in. He's playing running back these days. Jaquindon Jackson, former Texas Longhorn, could fill in for another former Texas Longhorn, Cameron Rising. But that'll be interesting to see how it goes. As far as too low for you, Tyler, who are you looking at?
Yeah, I've got another Pac-12 team that, I just am very bullish on. I think Washington is, to me, if anyone is going to challenge Utah for the crown this year in the conference, I think it's Washington, more even so than some other teams that we'll talk about in a second. But I think, they've got a really good offense. They've got some great players on defense, a lot of good teams in this conference. But I think they're probably, I'm kind of trending towards picking them to win the league this year, to be honest with you. And just to be clear, they're 11. I mean, that's not absurdly low, but I do think that they should be a top 10 team. Honestly, I think they're the best team in this conference.
Well, Washington has it when you look at it offensive side of the ball. And we know Trice on the defensive side, he's going to make an impact. So I can't really disagree with you there. But we're splitting hairs talking about a number 11 team, but I agree. Washington is maybe an underrated team. If you can be underrated as a top 12 team in the country. But moving right along, we have our final portion here as we look at the coaches poll. We're going to talk about who's left out. I might shock some people considering how tough I've been on this team in the past, but I got Iowa, and mostly because of what Cooper DeJean and that defense can do. The offense has some upgrades. Let's not forget that they brought over a former Michigan quarterback, Cade McNamara. He's a guy who led them to a Big Ten title just 2 years ago. He kind of got the raw end of the deal last year with J.J. McCarthy coming in and taking over. But now Cade is the guy, and I think the offense will be improved. And even if they play at a competent level, I think Iowa is the team you got to watch out for in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, people really like to joke about this program, but, really good defensively. And I do think the offense will at least take some sort of step forward this year with Cade McNamara. I think he's the most talented quarterback they've had in a bit, and I think he's going to raise their ceiling on that side of the ball. I think this is definitely a team to watch in the Big Ten West. And with, Wisconsin kind of going through a big transition, they might be the favorite.
Yeah, don't sleep. Don't sleep on the Hawkeyes is what we're saying. But who are you going with? Who got left out?
Yeah, I've got a team that I'm really surprised, honestly, isn't ranked. And I've got South Carolina. I mean, another team that up and down season in 2022, no doubt about it. But they ended the year really hot, taking down, Tennessee, ruining their playoff hopes, ending a really long losing streak against their rival in Clemson. They bring a lot back. They've got obviously Spencer Rattler, who when he's on can make any throw that, they ask him to. Obviously a guy that has struggled with decision-making at times, definitely has the potential to have those games where he blows up and throws 4 or 5 interceptions. Like that happens. It might happen again this year and probably will cost them at some point. But, you look at the offense with Juice Wells, Nicholas Harbor, a 5-star that they added, really versatile player, sort of a tight end, wide receiver, almost Kyle Pitts-esque kind of player. I think their potential is really high, and I'm a little surprised, honestly, that if they were, they included Texas A&M at number 25. I'm surprised that if you were going to squeeze one more SEC team in, I'm surprised that it was Texas A&M and not South Carolina.
I agree, and you talking about Nichols Harbor coming in. He replaces Jaheim Bell, who's now at Florida State. But he might be even more talented, and we'll kind of see how they utilize him. Do they use him in that running back versus tight end, big wide receiver role? But yes, I agree with you 100%. When you look at South Carolina, they're a team, and let's not forget, this is the team that beat Tennessee and Clemson back-to-back weeks to ruin 2 teams' chances of playing in the college football playoff last year. So don't sleep on South Carolina. You have to like what Shane Beamer is doing. He's got his own brand of Beamer ball, and it seems to be working in Columbia. But we're going to talk AP poll. It's very similar to the coaches poll, minus a couple of teams, but we're going to kick it off. Who's too high for you, Tyler? We're going to let you have the floor on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I've got number 6 USC. I just don't see it. We just talked about 2 Pac-12 teams that we both kind of think are being underrated by the pollsters entering the year. I don't know if I see it with USC. I think they're going to be a very similar team to what they were last year. I mean, there's no doubts about, the type of guy that Caleb Williams is, a game-changing quarterback, no doubt about it, a weapon that's going to keep them in pretty much any game. But they didn't look great against the best teams they played. That defense struggled a lot. Alex Grinch has a lot of questions, I think, as a defensive play caller. I don't think they really made a lot of changes that are going to I don't think they didn't turn much over from a personnel perspective. So I don't really see how it's going to take that leap. I think they're just kind of going to be in the same range they were last year. And that to me just doesn't correlate to being a top 6 team. When you look at the teams behind them, I think a Penn State team that could make a big leap this year, a Florida State team that maybe is the favorite to win the ACC. I just don't quite get why they're so high on USC aside from just the name recognition of quarterback.
USC reminds me of an old Big 12 team whose philosophy was the best defense is a really good offense. Shout out to Mike Leach at Texas Tech because, hey, Lincoln Riley was there. He understands. But looking at how this team is built, you're right. You look at them offensively, not a question in the world. We know Lincoln Riley is going to put them in a position to succeed, and we know Caleb Williams is going to execute as evidence the last year and a half. When you look at what he did at USC last year, that half of the season at Oklahoma prior to that, when he took over the job for Spencer Rattler, I don't have questions about that. My biggest question is why Alex Grinch is still in sunny California. I know the Trojan fans are asking the same question. I'm going to go on a different route, and this might surprise some people. I'm going with Texas A&M coming in at number 23. That's not high, right? But for me, 25, okay, you can sell me on 25. But when I look at this team, Texas A&M, the changes that they went through, the mass exodus of talent that left them during the offseason, they still have Connor Wegman. They got Max Johnson. But really, when I look at this team, I don't see a top 25 caliber team right now. You might as well say I'm from the state of Missouri. Show me.
Yeah, I mean, I think A&M is going to take a step forward this year from what happened last fall, but I think it's probably going to be slow. Like, I mean, maybe they end the year, ranked in the top 20 or maybe even pushing the top 15. That wouldn't shock me if that happened, if they turned in like a 9-3 type campaign. But yeah, I mean, like you said, lost a lot in the portal. You bring back a quarterback who's really promising in Connor Wegman. I think, impressed the way he played down the stretch, but I don't know if he was so good that we can just say that we don't have questions at all about, the quarterback position. And we've had a lot of questions about their offense, the offensive scheme with Jimbo Fisher. Bobby Petrino's in there now. I don't know who's actually calling the shots there, but I mean, just a lot of questions about this team. Looking at the teams that got left out, I'm surprised that they were one that made the cut, not only in the AP, but in the coaches as well.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a shock, but it almost seems like we hear this every year. Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Texas. These are the teams that we see year in, year out. They'll end the year unranked, and then by the time the preseason poll comes out, they're back in it. Can't understand why. But let's talk about somebody who's too low. Tyler, who are you going with? Who's too low for you in the AP poll?
Yeah, so this is one of the few areas where there's a little bit of a difference between the coaches and the AP poll. I'm going Tulane. They're 24 in the AP. They're 23 in the coaches. I think both of those are probably a little bit too low, but I think especially the AP. I mean, look, I think, this is a year where I don't think, especially with some of the top group of 5 programs historic, from the last decade or so, moving up to the Power 5 level this year, in like Cincinnati and UCF, there's not really a lot of clear competitors for, the G5 New Year's 6 spot. I think Tulane, who got it last year, is as good a pick as any. I mean, they bring back quarterback and Michael Pratt. Obviously got to replace some other pieces on offense, but I like the continuity there for the most part in a conference that's probably going to be easier to win now. I mean, I think they should probably be a top 20 team, to be honest with you.
You can sell me on top 20 based on how Tulane played. We saw what they did last year against USC in the Cotton Bowl. Ty Sharp, he will be missed, but don't forget that Pratt is still there, and Willie Fritz is still running the program, still running the show. You can sell me on that. But for me, if I'm talking about a team that's too low, I might surprise some people here on with this one. How about Oregon State? You look at a team last year, they were 3-2 after the loss against Utah on October 1st, went 7-1 the rest of the way. Their only loss came by 3 points to a team called Washington, who, as Tyler said earlier, they're too low. So that's a talented team right there. And let's not forget, they just added a former 5-star quarterback, DJ Alphabet Soup. That's what I'm going to say. But when you look at him, they clearly upgraded at quarterback. And I really like what they are doing up there in Corvallis. So for me, I'm buying in on the Beavers as a team that is too low this year in the AP poll.
Yeah, I mean, I love that pick. I think Oregon State is just really, they're overachieving a lot. I mean, last year was really impressive. Obviously they got the upset over Oregon, kind of ruined their season a little bit. and then ended the year with a win over Florida in dominating fashion. I mean, they're trending in a really good direction. They're probably the biggest dark horse. I mean, if you want to look at teams outside of USC, Utah, Washington, and Oregon, I think they're clearly the best team outside of that group. I don't know if it's even particularly close. So, in a year where obviously a lot of turmoil for the program off the field, with all the realignment stuff, I think they're going to be a really fun team, and I think it could be a fun story to watch if they can go on a run. But I agree that they should be ranked higher.
Yeah, they're a team that can make some noise in the final year of the Pac-12. Do I think they're going to win the Pac-12? Probably not. But they'll at least be entertaining to watch. Pac-12 after dark will definitely be entertaining. We looked at that. Now we're going to look at this one here. We did it for the coaches. We're going to do it here. Who got left out of the AP poll, in your opinion, Tyler?
Team that got left out of both, actually. I got UTSA. They're receiving votes. They're, I think, the third highest vote getter of non-ranked teams in both polls. Look, I mean, like I just was talking about with Tulane, I think they probably are the team to beat as far as getting that G5 New Year's 6 spot. But if you wanted to sell me on any other team, it's UTSA. I mean, they're the new addition to the AAC. A young program, but was already kind of running a Conference USA that was, sort of had some dysfunction within it. They were, I think, a kind of a beacon of consistency and stability. They're building a really good program with Jeff Traylor. They've got a great quarterback in Frank Harris, one of the best G5 quarterbacks in the entire country. This team is going to be really good this year. I think they're, the question is, if I'm trying to, kind of play devil's advocate, they're going to be facing tougher conference competition this year. I mean, even in an AAC that loses, Cincinnati and Houston and UCF, it's still a better league than what they were in. I think this should be a ranked team. I mean, I understand, you usually don't get more than one G5 team ranked in the preseason, but I think this is kind of a case where I think both Tulane and UTSA are kind of equally deserving.
You're right about that. The one question, kind of like you said, to be devil's advocate is, well, let's be honest, UTSA just lost their best wide receiver to Ole Miss.
That's
so
a good
there
point,
are questions about, who's going to be that next guy. But if there's a coach at the G5 level outside of Willie Fritz that I trust, I'm going to go with the Texas boy out of East Texas, Jeff Traylor. I think he's done a tremendous job really turning them around, because if you remember prior to him, Frank Harris couldn't get a winning season. Or Frank Wilson, I'm sorry. Frank Wilson, he could not have a winning season at UTSA. And he couldn't at McNeese State either, so maybe it was him. But when you look at that, look at him now. UTSA, they're coming off back-to-back 10-plus win seasons. I don't see why they can't do a third. And that's why I agree with you here. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube and just look to my left, my right, but your left on the screen, Texas Tech did not get ranked in the top 25 on the AP poll. I don't want to sound like a blatant homer. And I'm not asking for them to be top 20, 15, 10. I think they're a top 25 team on both polls. It was a little surprising when I didn't see Texas Tech in the top 25, considering how they finished the year and especially that game against Ole Miss where they just embarrassed them.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tech, there's a lot to like about this team. I think I do have some questions, and I think that, they could get lost in the shuffle, I feel like, a little bit in the Big 12 this year, just with it being such a packed group. I just don't know quite where they fit into that mix. Like, I could see Tech kind of having a year where it's like a 7-5 or an 8-5 that doesn't really feel like that. Like, it feels better than that, but that's just kind of where things end up. But yeah, I mean, I do think that, if you're looking at teams that are kind of ranked near the back of this poll, they probably should be in it for both, especially if you're going to put Texas A&M in there.
I agree with you 100%. You had to like the energy Joey McGuire brings to the table. It was fun to watch last year. I didn't want to be too much of a blatant homer, but I feel like I needed to get my my Texas Tech reference into each and every one of these episodes. But let's talk about, since you brought up Texas A&M, we're going to get into Johnny Manziel here shortly. But first, let's talk about week 0. Let's talk about some actual games before we get into the Untold Netflix story. Week 0 doesn't really have like huge headlines, right? There are a few games that I'm interested in. Unfortunately, one game that nobody's going to get to watch is on the Pac-12 network, and that's USC hosting San Jose State. That's a tough one for me. I want to be excited about that game, but I'm not going to get to watch it because it's on the Pac-12 network. And then obviously the other big name, Notre Dame and Navy. But considering BetMGM has Notre Dame currently as a 20.5-point favorite, I don't know how much fun that game is going to be to watch either, Tyler.
Yeah, I don't think Notre Dame Navy is going to be like a great game in terms of like an actual football game. I'm just really, really interested to see what Notre Dame's offense looks like with Sam Hartman. Especially in a game that's probably going to be sort of a ball control type, tempo and pace. Very curious to see how that works with the whole new look offense. I mean, and they're, not that Navy's been great recently, but they are starting off, in a rivalry game opponent with a pulse in Dublin. So you're dealing with international travel, time change, jet lag, all that kind of stuff. There are some factors here that I think make it worth watching.
And it's a great storyline though. The Irish in Ireland. I mean, Can it get any better than that to kick off the season?
No, and we certainly got some nice storylines out of the Ireland game last year. Who could forget the beginning of the end of Scott Frost? So, yeah, I mean, I think like you said, it sucks about the USC San Jose State game because I think that is a legitimately potentially good game. San Jose State is a I think a real legit G5 team. I'm not saying they're going to win, but I think that could be competitive. Not that I would ever advocate illicit streaming, but maybe a game where if you have access to doing that kind of thing, you might want to look into it. And then the only other game I wanted to make note of real quick, there's actually a legitimately very good G5 game in the nightcap between Ohio and San Diego State. That's actually could be a very good football game. And one player in particular to keep an eye on is Curtis Rourke, the quarterback for Ohio, reigning MAC player of the year, really, really talented quarterback. Guy that may be going to be playing on Sundays. So just if you're looking for intrigue in those later games, that could be a fun one.
How about this? As I close this segment before we go on to Johnny Manziel, Vanderbilt getting an easy win to kick off the season. They're hosting Hawaii after going to Hawaii. Well, they went to Hawaii last year, and we saw what happened there. But yeah, I had to like what Clark Lee's doing, and we'll see if going from a 2-quarterback system to the 1-quarterback system with AJ Swan for the Commodores. That's going to be interesting to watch on SEC Network. Now let's talk about Johnny Manziel. The Netflix recently dropped the Untold series, and I'm a big fan of the Untold series, especially the Malice at the Palace. That was a great story. But then we have the Johnny Manziel story on Netflix, and one of my big takeaways is, well, Manziel was acting exactly like everybody thought he was doing, having people take drug tests for him, just living it up. But you know what bothered me most is that he had this big smirk on his face the whole time he's telling these stories, some of which I figured he'd be a little embarrassed about.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. Like, I think I appreciated the transparency of it. I mean,
absolutely.
I think it's cool that he's at a point in his life where he can, sort of look back and talk about that openly. And obviously some, personal struggles he's had kind of came to light within that documentary that weren't really known before. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of am with you though. I mean, the kind of thought that I couldn't escape while watching it was, there's nothing really fundamentally different here than, like what I kept thinking was like, if Caleb Williams and Bryce Young wanted to be partying with Drake in the Hollywood Hills instead of going to class, like they could have been doing that. You know what I mean? Like they had that kind of profile. So I don't know if I loved the framing of like, this is like what, putting fame on a young kid will do, because it certainly can do that, but I think there's a lot of examples where it doesn't too. If I don't know if what I'm saying makes sense, but
yeah, it was almost the glorifying the bad part of what happens. But and let's be honest, I was a fan. I'm not a fan of Texas A&M being a Tech guy, but when Johnny Manziel was on the field, I couldn't help but watch. So it was like he was drawing everybody in, and one comment that he made in there, and I've seen multiple times, is how he was bigger than College Station, and it almost felt that way. It's like people who didn't even care one way or the other about A&M were tuning in because they wanted to see what this guy had in store on that particular Saturday.
Yeah. And one thing I do kind of like is how they sort of made a lot of the focus on what having a player like of that caliber with your football program, what that does for the university as a whole, in terms of fundraising, not just for sports, but just fundraising in general, admissions, applications, it really does make a big difference. And I think that highlights, now that I think we're in the NIL era, it's almost easy to forget that not that long ago, you couldn't make a dime doing anything without facing potential consequences. I think I did like that it illustrated, the kind of effect that a player of Johnny Manziel's caliber has on a university in comparison to what at the time players were allowed to reap from that,
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's talk about somebody else who could be facing a jury. And when I say jury, I mean the NCAA. Jim Harbaugh. Now, we had heard stories that Michigan, the NCAA, and Jim Harbaugh had agreed on a suspension. 4 games. Obviously, it wasn't a set of games that really were going to matter very much. But the NCAA says, no, we will not be doing the 4-game suspension, which begs the question. And Tyler, I'm kind of curious about your thought process here. Does this mean that when the actual investigation happens after the season and sanctions are handed down to Michigan, is he about to pull a Pete Carroll and head back to the NFL?
That will certainly be, I think, the talk of the town as this season gets underway. Look, yeah, I think sort of could pretty easily misread what's happening here. Kind of sounds like the NCAA tossed out a suspension. That does not mean Jim Harbaugh's in the clear. They tossed out his suspension because they didn't, Michigan was trying to get out ahead of it, do self-imposed punishment. We've seen schools do this kind of thing all the time. The NCAA wasn't having it. And I think the transcendent quote from all this is coming from the NCAA is that it's bigger than a cheeseburger, which, was the whole sort of, it stemmed from the idea that Jim Harbaugh had bought a burger for a recruit at a local restaurant. This is not ending anytime soon. And I think it's especially going to be a cloud in a season where I think Michigan has legitimate national championship expectations. If they were to win it, do they hold on to it? I don't know. And like you said, I mean, I think we've seen Harbaugh flirt with leaving in the past. I think you're probably going to see that again, especially if it seems like sanctions are coming down the pipeline. It's could be a real mess.
And let's be frank, this isn't about him buying a kid a cheeseburger. This is about him lying to investigators, being found out that he lied to investigators. Which is a whole different level. There's a whole different level. And that's why I think that sanctions could come down after the season, and then we're going to see the flirtation with the NFL once again.
Again, for like the third year in a row?
For the third year in a row. But if Michigan does make it to the Big Ten title game in Indianapolis, we could see a different future for the Big Ten. Reports coming out that there's a chance they could be going to Vegas. The Big Ten title game in Las Vegas at, is it Alliance Stadium?
Alliance, I think. No, that's Allegiance. Yeah. Sorry.
Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas. Obviously, where the Las Vegas Raiders play. But here's the interesting part. The Big Ten is primarily, in the upper Northeast, the Midwest.
Primarily.
Why are we talking about a conference title game in the Southwest, in Nevada? Now it's closer for Washington and Oregon, USC or UCLA. But for me, I'm looking at this and I don't quite understand it. But if they want a new venue, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of just, I guess, sort of serves as a natural midpoint between the Midwest schools and the West Coast schools. I mean, in that regard, it makes sense. I think, you would certainly, I think the purists would probably not be very happy with it leaving Indianapolis, And look, I've only been to Indianapolis one time, and it wasn't for like the Combine or Big Ten Championship or anything like that. But from everything I've heard, Indy's just a great city for hosting events like that. It's just easy to get around. Everything's pretty centralized around the stadium and stuff like that. So I think it's just a good event city, and geographically, obviously, for what the Big Ten has been historically, it's made a lot of sense to keep it in Indy. I would be a little surprised if they made the move to Vegas, especially considering, doesn't the Pac-12 play their championship in Vegas, or have they moved to LA now? I guess, I mean, maybe the Pac-12 won't exist anymore, but
what Pac-12 would be my question.
I mean, who knows what's going to happen? There's a lot of moving parts here, but yeah, I mean, in the meantime, yeah, I think that definitely is possible, but I don't really get it, especially for only 4 West Coast schools.
I don't get it either, but hey, the more stuff they can get in Vegas, I mean, there's a lot to do in that town. Just don't tell anybody about it, because what happens there stays there. But let's stay in the Big Ten, and let's talk about a team that doesn't get it, Northwestern. Holy cow. It appears that even though that one Mr. Pat Fitzgerald is no longer employed by Northwestern, that has not stopped staff members and the football team by paying homage to their former coach, wearing tone-deaf T-shirts or jerseys wearing the number 51. I believe it was 51. Pat Fitzgerald's old number, paying homage to him. To me, this says one thing: lack of institutional control. Clean it up. All of them have got to go. I mean, obviously, if you're going to have guys that are loyal to Pat, this will be a distraction, will be a problem until they clean house.
Yeah, really bad look. So yeah, like you said, they're wearing shirts that say "Cats Against the World," got Fitzgerald's number on it. You know, this is bad. I mean, disregarding just for a second the morality of the whole deal, you know, the idea that, you know, of all the things that, you know, were alleged to have happened at the program, this is also a coach who's actively suing Northwestern. Like, you're publicly showing support for someone who is legally challenging this. I mean, this is just a really bad look across the board. I mean, I think it just goes to show, like you said, you're probably going to have to clean house here. I mean, and by the way, when you called them tone deaf, I just want to be clear. That's not us editorializing. That's a direct quote from the Northwestern athletic director. He called the shirts tone deaf.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just one of those things where you can't do that. You know, a lot of people are comparing it to sort of the aftermath of the Baylor situation, where, you know, people that were still on the staff were showing their support for the Briles family. You just can't have it. Not when it's, you know, serious allegations like they had. Not when you're embroiled in a multi-million-dollar legal dispute with your former head coach who's suing you for, you know, improper termination. I mean, you just can't have it. And for David Braun, you know, obviously a guy who wasn't really around for any of this, you know, just got there a few months ago. I mean, you know, he's going to have, you know, a lot of leeway this year from an on-field perspective. But if you end up having to get rid of most of the assistants and really just clean house with the coaching staff, I'm not sure what argument really David Braun would have for staying on the staff.
And let's not forget, not everybody agreed with Pat Fitzgerald. That's why this lawsuit came about and why the firing came about. So essentially, with these tone-deaf shirts, as the athletic director called them, you could still have a fractured locker room. And really what Braun and Skip Holtz got to deal with is trying to bring them all back together for this football season coming up. It's a tough one for them. But make sure you come back next week. We're going to take a little deeper dive as we get ready for week 0 of the college football season. Plenty of stuff to talk about, as you know, news breaks all the time. So I'm sure there'll be other topics that we're going to handle. But for Tyler, I'm Patrick. See you next week.